Morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us, and I apologize for forgetting to record on Tuesday morning. Apologize for that. We are going to begin with chapter 38, verse 8. The story that Yehuda's oldest son passed away, passed away, and now he asks Onan to marry Tamar, to marry his widowed daughter-in-law. And the language in the pasuk is do yibum with her, again, which we normally translate as levirate marriage. This is going to be a mitzvah in the Torah. This is the famous halacha that if a husband passes away without having had children, with no living, I should say, with no surviving progeny, then there's a mitzvah for his brother to marry the widow. But Yehuda already is coining this term, even though it's long before the Torah is given. And then he says, "V'hakem zera la'achicha," establish offspring for your brother, which always takes people for a little bit of a loop. Well, what does that mean? Establish offspring for your brother. These won't be your brother's children. These won't be your brother's biological children. So what does it mean exactly? So let's see the Ramban. Ramban on Pasuk Ches. So he starts off by quoting Rashi. Habein yikare al shem hames. So Rashi says that the intent of establishing offspring for your brother is if you, Onan, have a child with the widow Tamar, you have a boy with the widow Tamar, the boy will be named heir. The boy will be named after the first deceased husband. Says the Ramban, Ve'ein ze emes, this is not correct. Ki b'mitzvah Torah nemar gamkein, yakum Hashem achiv hames, v'lo yimochesh shmo b'Yisrael. The Ramban says there's actually a very similar thing by the Torah's mitzvah of Yibum. It says that when the brother marries the widow, the child or the brother will rise up on the name of his brother, and the name will not be wiped out. So it seems to be the pasuk seems to be saying by the mitzvah of Yibum that the child born from this levirate marriage will be named after the deceased brother. And the Ramban says, but the Ramban says that's not the halacha, and that's not the halacha we learn from this pasuk. That the child born from a levirate marriage does not have to be named after the deceased brother. The Omar Boaz, the Gamis Rus HaMoaviyah, Ashes Machlon, Kanisi Lisha, La Kim, Shem Hames, Al Nachalaso. Very interesting. So when Boaz decides to do Yibum with Rus, he says that I've decided to marry her to establish the name of the deceased on his inheritance. And the name of the deceased will not be eradicated from among his brethren and his place. So you hear that pasuk. So Boaz, we have a reference to the name in this pasuk. We have a reference to the name by the levirate marriage. We have a reference to the name by the story of Rus and Boaz. So I ask you, what is the name of the child that's born from the union of Rus and Boaz? So you're waiting for it to be Machlon, because that was the name of Rus's husband. Vatikrena Oso Oved. It's in the psukim at the end of Megillas Rus. The name of their child is Oved. Lo Machlon, not Machlon. So then what did Boaz mean when he said, I want to keep the name going? Certainly not naming the child that way. The Ocha Amar Vayeda Onan, Ki lo Yazora. Mahara asher tavo alav ad ki hishchizaro miponea imikari shem benok shem achim hames v'rov bnei ha'adam misavim lasos came. Says in the pasuk that Onan married Tamar, the brother married Tamar, but he didn't want to have a child with her. And the language in the pasuk is because Onan knows that the offspring will not be associated with him, will not be associated to him. So says the Ramban, what does that mean? If it just means that Onan knows that the child will be named heir after the deceased brother, people do this all the time. Why would it be disturbing to Onan? All the time when people have a baby, they try to figure out what loved ones have passed that haven't have anyone named after them, right? It's a very natural thing. Why would it bother Onan so much if the child will be named after heir, if that's what's going on? Okay, so skipping a few lines. Aval ha'inyan sod gadol misodos haTorah v'told us Adam. V'nikar hu le'inei roa m'shenasan le'Hashem einayim liros v'aznayim l'shmoa. Ramban says this is like a deep idea. If you understand, you understand it. If you don't, you don't. Great people understand that there's a great function in the levirate marriage. Basically, the closest relation who's willing should do it because there's a great effect that comes from it. But you know, again, Lisa, Ashes Hameis, Ach, or Av, or Korban HaMishpacha, V'lo Yadanim HaYamina Kadmon, Lifnei Yehuda. So basically, the Ramban says this is an intuitive thing. Even though it's before the Torah is given the mitzvah of Yibum, the idea of sort of keeping things going in honor of the deceased family member is an intuitive thing. So he says, so the idea would be, first, it would be to have one of the brothers do it. And then if there wasn't a brother, theoretically, this concept could be fulfilled through the father. And that ultimately is actually what happens, unbeknownst to him, right? We know the story. Yehuda gets scared. So after Onan dies, Yehuda's afraid to ask the third brother to marry Tamar. So Yehuda sort of avoids Tamar, basically, kind of, don't call me, I'll call you. And Tamar is very frustrated by that. So Tamar creates a circumstance where she puts herself in disguise that Yehuda will have relations with her, because that also is continuing the line. Okay. I just want to see if I should move on at this point. Okay, so it's an interesting. What? You want to sit on my left? Okay, it's an interesting thing to think about, and this is a point of great confusion, that the mitzvah of the Torah with Yibum is not that the child be named after the deceased. And the Ramban says you see it by the story of Boaz, you see it here. All it really means, it's the way to honor the person who's passed on, not by names. And so that's what Onan was bothered by. Because Onan knows that, like, everyone, whenever they see Onan's family, it's going to be like, oh yeah, that's like really like the makeup for Er's family. And that wasn't exciting to him. Okay, so now we are going to go on verse 24. Okay, fast forward in the story. Two of Yehuda's sons have died in marriage with Tamar. And by the way, it really wasn't the Tamar thing, it was really their thing. They actually were what's called Motzi Zera Levatala. They intentionally would waste seed because they didn't want to impregnate her. And they both died because of the as a punishment. And so Yehuda doesn't know that. And Yehuda is afraid to have his third son marry Tamar. Tamar is frustrated by this. So Tamar presents herself as a harlot, and Yehuda meets her, and Yehuda has relations with her, but he doesn't know who it is. And then word gets back to Yehuda that Tamar is pregnant, and there was sort of like the sense that she was sort of still, forgive my language, but still sort of like in reserve, so to say, for the extended family, that someone from the extended family would ultimately marry her. And then she goes and she becomes pregnant. So that's sort of like being unfaithful on some level. So Yehuda clearly had a leadership position in that area. And now we read in verse 24, Vayehi k'mishlosh chadashim vayugad liyuda le'mor. So approximately 3 months had passed. Of course, pregnancy shows at that point. And Yehuda is told, Zansa Tamar kalasecha. Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has acted in an inappropriate manner, sexually. And she's pregnant. Vayomer Yehuda, and Yehuda says, Hotziuha v'sisaref. Take her out and let her be burnt. Now, the next part of the story is this famous thing. She sends him a discreet message because he had left things behind with her. Does he know who owns these things? Which was basically the sign that the reason I'm pregnant is from you. And Yehuda, to his credit, there's much made of this. Yehuda publicly admits that it was him and that nothing should happen to her. What I want to focus on here is, where did Yehuda get from that she's supposed to be burnt to death? What's that about? Where's that coming from? I mean, it seems to be pretty explicit in the pasuk. Ramban on pasuk Chav Dalet. Vayomer Yehuda Hotziua v'Sisaref. Amar Ephraim Maksha Talmido Shemameir Tamar Bito Shel Shem Haisa Shu Kohen Lefichach Danua B'Sreifa. Rashi brings down a very interesting idea. So we have this idea that Shem was a Kohen. This is this idea, if you remember, that Abraham gave tithes to Shem. Shem was some type of priest of Hashem. We spoke about this a long time ago. So Rashi brings down a pshat that Tamar was the daughter of Shem. There's a halacha in the Torah that the daughter of a Kohen, it's a very narrow halacha, but the daughter of a Kohen who acts in an inappropriate marital manner gets misas sreifa, gets the death penalty of Beis Din involving burning, which it's not. Don't think Salem witch trials. So this is not burning at the stake and things like that. It's different, but gets a death associated with flame. And so where in the world is this coming from? So this is the theory that Rashi brings down, that Tamar was the daughter of a Kohen. So like this halacha, though, we later in the Torah, is brought in over here. Says the Ramban, Vani lo yodati hadin hazeh shabas Kohen ein chayav sreifa el biznus umzika sabal arusa nesua. Ramban says, first of all, this halacha, even if she was a bas Kohen, this halacha would not apply in this case. So what's going on over here? Skipping some lines, V'nir Ali, Sha Yehuda Katzin Shoter Moshe Ba'aretz. Yehuda was a prominent person in the land. Va'akala shetizne elav einen nidona k'mishpat shara anashim ach k'mevazes hamalchus. It was like Yehuda was like the monarch, like of the area. So his daughter-in-law doing this, it was like a disgrace to Yehuda's family. So therefore, there's sort of like a special status here. And so he thinks that the appropriate punishment would be that. Just interesting for the backdrop. I see there are different comments that people are ready to make. I have to apologize. I have to get Miriam where she's supposed to go. She actually has been waiting for a while. So I'm gonna just to review what we spoke about today. We spoke about the idea of Yibum and what the goal of Yibum is, and we spoke about this idea of the what would have been the punishment for Tamar. Okay, the midday group will meet today, God willing, and I want to wish everyone a happy Hanukkah. Be well.